Thank you for tuning in to the Headless Marketing Show. On today's episode, our guest is Jacob Byers. Jacob is the studio owner and full stack developer at Omni. Jacob is a self-described marketer turned developer. He became a developer because he wanted to address the technical issues that companies face when they are being competitive online. In his time as a developer, he has used several monolithic systems like WordPress, and he was always frustrated that these all-encompassing solutions were not nimble enough to adapt to the ever-changing space that is the global web. Enter the Jamstack and Headless CMS. Now in his company, Omni, he is able to use modern technologies that are scalable in nature and allowing his business clients to run their website as part of a larger omni-channel strategy. This gives him the ability to use cleaner user experience and give his customers' users the experiences they expect from the web. So without further ado, let's bring on Jacob.
Hey, Jacob. Welcome to the show.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to having you on. I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while, so thanks for coming on to the Headless Marketing Show today.
Of course. No, I'm really excited to be able to talk to another developer about Jamstack and kind of how it helps marketers as well as like how it helps us as, for terms of like learning the program, also using just new modern technologies to make our jobs easier.
Absolutely. Well, let's start right there. So you use the phrase Jamstack. I mean, what is Jamstack to you?
To me, it's an agnostic way to develop websites and apps. And what I mean by that, it gives me the ability to swap out tools that don't work and use things that ultimately make the marketer or the business owner's lives much easier, as well as save precious development time for me, because I'm not being forced to use some monolithic service.
Well, and so to you, the Jamstack is really kind of an approach to websites. It's not necessarily like an arithmetic, right? 1 + 1 = 2. It's much more amalgamous than that.
Yeah, exactly. It's not trying to close me in on a way of thinking or a way of just developing a website. It's basically just opening to what my creative potential can be, as well as like what a marketing team or a business owner really desires for their website in terms of just being competitive. I'm sure you're very aware of this with your business, but like it seems that when a company becomes very aware of how far their website can go, they stop making calling card sites and they build essentially a marketing generation engine to compete and to essentially kind of set themselves apart from anybody else on the market.
Well, and the internet is, we've been in the internet is kind of shifting out of its infancy, right? Like we don't just have to do calling card brochure websites. In fact, most users don't get much benefit from those kinds of websites anymore, and they're looking for better experiences, and whether that's commerce, whether that's content, entertainment, what have you. And I've always argued that, hey, like building user first means we need to get rid of some of the old playbooks about how you build a website and be a little bit more nimble and creative in our infrastructure. And to you, that's what the Jamstack really is.
Yeah, exactly. It allows us to try out new content types. It allows us to swap a tool whenever we need it, so that you get back that nimbleness that you get when you're a business starting out. And it really comes down, and I'm sure like you see this every single day, which is that people do spend time on your website. If you have good content, they'll read what you have to say, and if they like it or they get a good essentially vibe from your website, they'll work with you. And a great way to do that is to have content that matters or content that's creative to kind of capture someone's attention instead of just having a single site that has pretty colors and pictures.
Right. Well, and so as you go and build websites, I mean, what are your favorite ways of using the Jamstack? What are some of the microservices that you find yourself using with some repetition?
Right now, it really comes down to using a good headless CMS. And for those who don't know, what headless CMS, or at least for me, all it does is gives me as the developer clean content or clean data essentially. And so that allows me to use whatever framework or whatever code I want that works for you based on our conversations prior, to really make something that's clean and that it gets rid of all of the bloat. And so a good tool, for example, and I think you guys use this too, is Sanity. Because with Sanity, instead of giving you something like Squarespace where you have not only your pages, your authors, but you also have like tons of metadata information. You have tons of like places that add color, icons, and things. And it's so much information that an HR person, marketer, you name it, someone who doesn't develop for a living, can get super overwhelmed by all the bells and whistles that a CMS could offer. And it really takes away from you trying to create content. And so something like Sanity, or really any headless CMS, I'm able to work with you in what you need and then put in an easy way for you to add that special metadata that you need to add for when posting content, without having to show you a bunch of other stuff. I just give you exactly what you want when you need it, and then we can go from there and work on building your foundation or working on your message, and then building a tool that works with that.
Yeah. And so for folks that are listening, right, we've thrown two fairly big buzzwords at them, right? Jamstack and Headless CMS. So do you mind kind of quickly describing what you think that, the Jamstack, it's agnostic, you're not tied down to a monolithic system, but what, from maybe an easier or in a more approachable way, what is the Jamstack? And then again, what is a Headless CMS?
Yeah, to dub it down, I mean, marketers understand this. I talk to a lot of marketers who have some kind of development experience. I think the successful ones out there kind of have an idea. What Jamstack is, it's essentially, it takes your website and removes it from the CMS so that it's a separate entity that you have to, or that you can manage and simplify your development process. It's like its own app, and kind of the magic behind it is that you have a hosting provider build a new site or like do server-side rendering and all that fancy stuff separately from your content management system. And so that brings in what is called the Headless CMS, because what we're traditionally used to, like with WordPress, we have a all-encompassing system where you have your content or your content management system and your website built into one. And that's nice, but you're stuck with that system. You're stuck within that walled garden where you can't kind of go out beyond the bounds of it, or you have to pay for a plugin to get advanced features, or put in lots of dev time to essentially manipulate it to what you want. And so instead of doing that, we go to what's called a Headless CMS, where you get your content management system and you're able to add in the content that you exactly need, and it gives out clean data that can be applied to your website as an API or as just data being applied to your website. Does that make sense?
It does. That's a really good way to describe it, right? Is a Headless CMS, you're just managing content. You don't have to worry about the templates. It doesn't do the build. It doesn't do anything but content management. And it can really be set up to the specific content model of the customer, right? And that's probably one of the reasons you as a developer love working with Headless CMS, is because you get to treat content like data. What are some of the advantages that you as a developer gain by using a Headless CMS?
Yeah, I mean, actually, whenever a developer kind of learns about Jamstack, at least the ones I've talked to, start hopping over, because we're allowed to use modern frameworks, which for a non-developer, all that really means is that there's code out there that makes writing other code easier. And all that really entails is that we're able to build websites and apps faster, cleaner, and have to manage so much less than having to deal with something like WordPress. And as a developer, it makes my job easier. It makes me a lot happier. It also allows me to work on bigger problems that are so much more fulfilling than having to do the same little tedious tasks over and over again, like I do with WordPress. And I'm able to kind of bring those savings back to my marketer because maintenance and management ends up becoming so much cheaper for them in the long run. And like, because that's the thing I think marketers get really like hung up on at first, is that like, okay, building the site initially might seem expensive, but in the course of like even just 1 year or a few months, the maintenance costs get super cheap because like, you know, we're able to reuse content over again. Like, for example, I have a website with a client where every content or every block I build for them is able to be reused for multiple channels. And it blows their minds because they're so used to copying that content over and over again, instead of having one place to put like their authors and it being called to multiple websites, multiple pages and platforms, without having to do that work over and over and over again. That's where the savings come into play in terms of maintenance.
Right. Well, and you don't have to. You don't have to babysit an operating system, right? Just some of the simpler things too that like, you know, the boogeyman can't necessarily come as calling as easily, or for the trivial reasons that it can happen on traditional systems like WordPress or Drupal, right? Where there's an operating system, and operating systems can go offline, right? Like it happens, and that's a lot harder on a Jamstack website.
Exactly, and like to your point, like dealing with an operating system, like I think a lot of people don't realize that that's what they're getting with WordPress, Webflow, or Squarespace, is that those systems not only can go offline, but there is thousands, if not millions, of lines of code running in the background that are all kind of band-aid together because these companies are applying like updates and changes depending on what their users need. And that's a problem because what one user might need might break another person's site, and all of a sudden put us in a situation where we're like having to like, or we're asking questions like, why am I copying a page and it breaks the content? Why am I adding an advanced custom field and it's not like actually like working on our end? You know, it just like little things that add up that I think every marketer kind of has like a scary story they have with WordPress, with something breaking, something little tiny. You can't really explain it, but like it's just like this massive like underwater iceberg where you like at the top you see like all this great stuff, but then there's all these little things that add up that just are so frustrating, and that's what Jamstack solves.
Right, a death by 1,000 cuts, right? That's the well. As marketers are looking at Jamstack and Headless CMS, I mean, it can really feel daunting, right? The devil I know is WordPress. The devil I don't know is Headless CMS. You know, what are some of the things that organizations and marketers, even developers, kind of have to start to come to understand with Jamstack and Headless CMS to kind of help them make the decision to transfer their stack from a monolith to something more Jamstack oriented? What are some of the things they need to think about?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is a big one I'm dealing with right now. We had a conversation about this a while back about a client I'm working with, and it was amazing to find out that when it comes to Headless or when it comes to Jamstack, I find, or at least with this one client, we're starting to have to ask questions about like, what is like our foundation? Like, what is our design system? What is like our message really implying? And like, I guess like the best way I can describe it is like, it's instead of doing what everybody else is doing, it's doing inner work. It's like, you know, I guess like hippie way to say it. But instead of focusing on the best, like the latest and greatest, flashiest tools, we're asking the question about like, what does our look really entail? What is our like design system going to be for not just websites, but for pamphlets, pages and journals going to be? And that's a harder thing to figure out as a marketing team, because it makes everybody have to like actually get together and decide what is us. And
Mm-hmm.
when you have that, the tools no longer matter because you already have like the hard stuff figured out, so that when it comes to choosing a CMS or a tool set, you're basically choosing something that's going to work with you instead of looking for a tool that's going to answer your problems, or essentially like can give you like this shallow self-fulfillment. It's kind of hard to explain, but like
Well,
I
what
think you deal with this. What's up?
Yeah, well, what you just described is one of the things that I'm always talking about as well, right? Is if Jamstack and Headless CMS, they allow you to start at the user, right? In a very impactful way, instead of starting at the back end, right? Which is where most marketing people traditionally start. You know, we need to do something for our users. Let's go all the way back and find a tool, instead of what are we going to say to our user? Why does the user care? What is the experience, and who are we, and what? And it's kind of that. It's the internet is maturing, and so too must organizations have to mature about the way that they think about their experiences. And again, if you really do that, if you first, you run into all kinds of problems when you're stuck on a monolith, because you're like, we want this particular experience. We think our business model, our customers really gonna love it. And then, turns out it's really, really hard to do that on WordPress, or we're on Squarespace. We have all this technical debt. We can't do that experience. And and that's one of the reasons to consider the Jamstack. But you have to like go through that exercise, right? Which is, it's harder. I mean, well, it's easier in the long run, but like there's a short span of time where it's like a big task, right?
It is. It's, I mean, like you said, it's maturing, because like, I think all these like marketing systems out there, like Webflow, like HubSpot, WordPress, they're all like, they have this illusion of like, we're going to solve your problem. But if you didn't actually like take the time to realize what your problem really is, you're going to run into the same issue over and over again. Like, oh, this template works, but I need to add this feature and it's not possible. Or, oh, Webflow works, but like it's not scaling really well because it turns out our site's going to end up having a couple thousand pages. You start like, you're going to run into the same issues over and over and over again without doing like the groundwork that's super important for your brand, especially if you're a big business. Like at that point, like you have a team. Your team, like, I mean, I assume loves working for you. So I'm sure they'll be really happy to like answer these deep questions about who we are, what we stand for, what do we want to be like. And when you solve that, then Jamstack becomes, we make a solution that's tailored to that. That makes it really easy for your marketers to focus on what they want to create, as well as be able to answer questions like, oh, what if I don't like this API? Like, I'll give it a scenario. Like, a lot of marketers I work with use Marketo, and they love Marketo. Like, there's a lot of like good features Marketo has for like form fillings and campaign management. But maybe down the road you'd be like, okay, I actually want to use HubSpot for these form fillings, or actually I don't use Marketo to its full like potential. So like, I actually want a simpler form filler. Jamstack has the ability to build your forms, so you get to keep your forms and then swap out Marketo for HubSpot, or vice versa, or to swap out an API tool without losing those awesome forms you built or losing those awesome pages you built. Like, you have the ability to change your mind, which is super powerful with Jamstack, something you just will not get with a monolithic system.
Right. I had the vice president of marketing for Strappy, an open source headless CMS, on. And I'm always talking front end, user first, right? He was really harping on what you just talked about, which is the technical debt of monoliths, right? Because if you're going to change, you have to deal with that debt, whether you like it or not, right? I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. So as you work with new customers, as you kind of they're kind of bringing people onto the stack and sharing it with marketing teams, you know, outside of that big, like, okay, we're going to be building the front end bespoke. We have do whatever we want for our users. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What are some of the other, maybe not issues, but the trade-offs, concerns, or things that kind of come up in the process that that make it more difficult for marketers to leave their older legacy tool and get into this more modern modular web management?
Yeah, I wonder if it's like, I mean, it's understandable, like the fear of if I'm gonna like leave WordPress and the plugin ecosystem that I love and I've been used to using for, some of them have been using them for over 5 years. Like, how do I know that this
With,
new tool is gonna
by
really
the
solve
way,
my
it's
problem?
only 5 years.
It's not that long. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not that long at all.
yeah, not that long. But like they worry that like by going to a new tool, they're gonna run into this like limbo of like whether or not the tool actually works, and having to like adjust their workflow to the new tool, or the fact that like they have like for a company using Jamstack, chances are you're gonna be talking with a developer, like having to like have that conversation going with their marketing teams, wanted to be like not bothered, they want to just use their tools, not have to deal with all of that. But yeah, like you do have to talk to the developer. But the important thing about that conversation is that it's going to give you more creative space. It's going to give you more abilities to use tools that you've never thought of before, to be real. Because like you and I, if we go to say NPM, which for non-devs, this is just a library of tools we can use to build apps and websites. Like a lot of upwards of 20,000, if not millions of tools available to us to build something unique. Whether a marketer with their plugin ecosystem and their CMS might only have like 60 options for that. Like it's kind of crazy, like the breadth of options. Yeah. So I think the trade-off really is it's just like kind of trusting that the new tools are going to actually like solve the problem. And like, as long as you tell your developer your needs, like really be able to like articulate well, you're going to get something you're going to like a lot.
So yes, people need to trust what they get from the new tool. But I guess, what are some of the trade-offs or things that you have to consider when you're approaching Headless CMS and Jamstack and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think this actually kind of relates to something we were talking about earlier, where you start having asking like bigger questions of like who you are as a company, as a marketing team, and like what are you really trying to portray to people. And that makes Jamstack really fun, or makes picking a headless CMS really fun, because as soon as you actually figure out like what kind of content you want to create, you can pick a CMS or a tool that actually kind of fits your narrative, or fits your persona. And so that means though that you kind of have to start talking to the developers to really articulate what your desires are for a content system, to pick that right tool. And just to know that you can trade out tools down the road if you need to be. Like Jamstack's very nimble like that. You can change out an API for another, and so on and so forth. But that trade-off though means that not only do you have to talk to the developers, but there might be a little bit of lag time when doing things like wiring up APIs, or like connecting a CMS with a storefront, or connecting your website with like forms and like backend tools like user management and authentication. But that's where it kind of becomes super like amazing and creative because all of a sudden you might have a CMS that traditionally would have been like a blogging tool. You end up having a CMS that could be a blog tool, a podcast tool, something that can run like your chain of restaurants in their menus, like it's pretty crazy. But you have to know that it really comes down to you having to articulate your needs and wants to the developer, and to kind of create and plan that what that stack is going to be like. And it's important because it's going to go much farther than picking that flashy tool.
Right. Well, and right now, a lot of marketers have an amalgam of flashy tools, and then they have this disjointed and strange front-end experience where it's really hard to like keep the same brand experience across all your channels. They're copying and pasting their content all over the place, and it's it makes that front end experience a little bit tougher to really deliver to the and user expectations are front end needs to be sharp and the internet has matured, right?
Yeah, exactly. And to add to that, I mean, then like the marketing team is wondering why it's taking forever to implement a landing page when they didn't realize that by choosing multiple tools like Webflow and Marketo, that the developer all of a sudden has to do double the work because they have to change the styling, add the components and all the scripts to multiple sources, when in Jamstack it could just be one.
Just one, right? And
Yeah.
and that's another major element of like headless CMS, right? Is you have a single hub for all of your content regardless of channel, right? Because again, the CMS doesn't care about the front end, right? Which is a blessing and something that you have to figure out, because the nice part is it's front, there is no front end, so you can put your content anywhere. But then marketing goes, oh my gosh, what is anywhere? Where is anywhere? Right? You have to start to have a plan. You have to be a little bit more mature about your process, because you can deliver your content via API, right? It can go anywhere. Earlier, you said that you have to work with developers, right? And I think I had a previous episode of the show where we talked about really needing to have good synergy between development and marketing, especially if you want to create, high-end, good experience. From your experience being a developer working with marketers, how do you foster that kind of good relationship? How do you work together to essentially do what everybody wants to do, the same thing, which is make a great experience, get your messaging in front of users and have a website that is delivering, the business outcomes that everybody is expecting. How do you foster that kind of relationship with marketing? Because you can joke whether it's real or not, there's kind of like, it's a bit of a argumentative relationship sometimes, right? Where oil and water, however. But at the same token, if there's good synergy, really nice things happen. So how do you work to kind of foster those kinds of relationships with the marketing teams you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, it is a dance. There is like the marketing team a lot of times will feel that you're hindering their ideas and creativity when in fact you're trying to add to it actually. And like, I mean, this goes with like almost any department. Like the more collaboration you have, the more conversations that are being had, like we end up finding not compromises, but better solutions than compromises. Because we're all of a sudden able to sit at the same table, and I can think of every tool I can work with. I can easily search for new tools that we can easily use in Jamstack that are just not available on WordPress or Webflow, and kind of show the marketer that like we can do what you want and some, or we can do what you want, but like going this direction might actually help your technical department with their documentation. Like there's something that Jamstack kind of can do that monolithic systems can't, which is that like you can bring in other departments in the company. And so by just talking with marketers about that and just being more inclusive, like inclusivity actually works. It just, again, comes down to just having conversations about this stuff. And when it comes for me and other marketers, I try my best to listen, try to just show them that I understood what they were saying. I mean, you go through this too, and show them why going the route of Jamstack can do that. And we can have this added benefit where we can kind of go beyond that scope. And like, yeah, I know you don't see this. I know you guys don't like, you don't have like a flashy tool that shows you an example, but like, that's the point. We can create for this from the ground up and create something that makes you guys more unique than the rest of the competition, which is important at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, to that point, right? Like, marketers can say, hey, I just need a tool. If I had one tool that did everything for me and I never had to rely on a developer again, that that might seem like a good idea, right? And to a lot of folks, they feel like that's where the market is heading, right? We'll have all of our eggs in the HubSpot basket. We'll have all of our eggs in the WordPress basket, or, you name the monolith, right?
Yeah.
But then technical debt and the limitations of the front end come calling, and you need developers, whether you're going to stay on WordPress or stay with HubSpot or not, right? Like, eventually the realities come around that, we actually need developers. It's kind of like this fallacy to think they're not needed. Developers just work on product and we'll work on marketing. Never the two shall meet. And then we're not a summation of our parts anymore, right? In fact, we're not talking together, and the customer is the one falling through the cracks, right? And that's I think sometimes it just takes that way, right? Like, we have to be in the bad spot to realize, okay, there's a better way forward, right? Sometimes that you can't get there until you're in a bind, right? And I find that to be sometimes, the only way forward, right? It's interesting. Do you find that to be true?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To that point, like, this is really a big deal, and also something that I guess in my rant or my misunderstanding of marketers, that you'd think that there'd be an understanding that if you choose a marketing system like HubSpot, doesn't really matter, it can be any of those systems, you're only going to be able to do what everybody else can do with that system. You might be able to be creative up into a certain point, but there might be a day, actually probably an hour from now, when you first start using this, where you're going to want to do something that the system can't. And so what are you going to do? Are you going to hope for HubSpot or WordPress to make a plugin or to implement that in the future? Can't really. It might not ever happen, to be honest with you. And so that's where developers end up shining, because every day there's new tools, there's new APIs coming out that we're able to use first before anybody else. And that is what sets companies who use developers in Jamstack, or just use developers in general, end up doing better, because they know that they have to create what the market should be. They have to create the new content to set themselves apart. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck doing the same thing everybody else is doing. And it's hard, but I think marketers should understand that, which is that we have to be creative in how we present ourselves, which means making things up, means creating out of nothing instead of focusing on what tool is going to solve our problem.
Right. Well, and I think honestly, it's just people have access to what they have access to. And, if you're talking to other marketers, you're going to get other marketing tools, right? That's going to be kind of the group think there. If you're only talking to developers are like, what's the API? What's the framework? What's this, new method that we can deploy? And you have to bring those together, right? Based on our conversation, I was like, we got to do a podcast on this. I was talking about Oreo cookies, right? Is if you have good architecture, crispy chocolate, and some creamy, beautiful marketing content, you have arguably the best cookie that was ever made, right? If you don't, could you imagine if Oreos could you imagine if Oreos came in a box where you had to self-assemble and do it yourself? You're like, that'd be tricky. Or, that you had to find them in different parts of the store. And that's kind of where organizations find themselves today, right? You have to kind of build a process by which that collaboration can happen, which isn't easy, and both departments have to buy in, right? Both departments have to buy in. And we're back to this concept of maturity, right? That it does take some maturity to have even the willpower, let alone the capability to do that. Well, as we kind of wrap up here, where do you see Headless CMS and Jamstack going? Where do you see web experience in general going? We're kind of post-pandemic. Maybe we're still in the tail end of it, however you want to look at that. But we've had a meteor, a ton of growth has happened in digital experience. Obviously, this isn't slowing down. digital commerce is on the rise, digital content
Yeah.
consumption is on the rise. What do these trend lines tell you, and what do you see as kind of coming down the pike for experience, for marketing development in the Jamstack ecosystem at large? It's not a small question, but
Oh yeah, no, it's a very important question. I'm very excited about e-commerce in the Jamstack space. Like, there's some amazing tools coming out where you no longer are having to run like a basic Shopify site. You can run an e-commerce solution that like Mercedes-Benz would use to run their entire chain. Like, it's crazy what tools are coming out. But I think where Headless is going, or where Jamstack in general is going, at least what I see, is that there are companies right now making it easier to do these wire ups, or making it easier for API 1 with API 2 to be able to communicate with each other. Like I find tools where they'll take GraphQL, which is it's a big query language that developers use to take the data from a CMS to your website. There's companies who are now making it easier to add additional storefronts and even music players, like anything you can think of, making it easier for us developers to just connect it. Because right now there's a lot of documentation on how to connect things, but we're kind of it's still very new. We're still having to be creative in how we connect tools together. And that's being solved right now, which is going to make it easier for marketers to say yes to these things when they know that implementing a new feature might take an hour, instead of maybe a day or two, which is still really fast. Like a monolithic system, it might be weeks or months to do these things. Whether Jamstack makes it like quick,
right,
and it's only going to get faster.
Right. Well, and it's only API to API it's APIs are eating the internet, right? I mean, that's the phrase you've heard. But right now, some APIs have almost no documentation, and you're just like, well, we get to hack at this and figure it out. But what a cool API! Yeah. It does anything, But how and where and what should we do with it? I had a similar conversation with an e-commerce integrator, and they were saying as soon as the API to API economy from the outside in becomes as easy as the plugin economy, because that's a misnomer. Plugins aren't easy; they just have the appearance of being easy. But APIs are much more. They're much more honest about the integration, right? Whereas plugins, they kind of hide everything in the background, and then you do the plugin, and then everything goes wonky, right? Whereas with the API, you got to do the legwork up front. But as soon as that appearance becomes easier, his opinion was that's when adoption will really start to skyrocket, because people will be less afraid. Again, that devil I know is better than the devil I don't know. And there are some really cool tools out there making it to do stuff with APIs, right? Or at least in a lower code solution. Yeah.
I mean, there's a market for it. I mean, just with plugins we've seen with WordPress, where entire companies will build a single plugin that solves a problem. We're going to see people doing the exact same thing with those APIs that don't have documentation, and they're going to be like, okay, just use our tool and we'll make it very easy for your tools to communicate. And like you said, the appearance will look much easier than it is right now. And that's another thing I could mention the marketers is when you're dealing with a plugin, you're also dealing with that guy's code, or that company's code. And having to maintain that code or hope that the company maintains it is so much more excruciating than maintaining something simple ourselves and just getting the data we need. An API gives you data.
That's
very simple versus having to get someone else's JavaScript app. you know?
Right. Well, and again, but on it's almost even sometimes I wonder if it's the word, right? People, they plug stuff into the wall every day. You just plug it in. You plug it right in, right? Versus an API, what's that? It's a bridge that, it's just so different, right? You can't conceptualize it, and so it's easy to think plugins are easy and APIs are hard, but on the at the surface level that might appear that way, but you dig in deeper and you're right. Plugins, there's an operating system, there's somebody else's code, and there's you got to maintain them, you got a lot. It's a much more dynamic workflow, whereas an API, once it's implemented, I mean, criminy, that thing is stable, I mean,
Yeah,
at least
very stable.
theoretically. Well, hey, this was a great conversation with you today, Jacob. I really appreciate you coming on to the show and talking about your experience with Headless CMS and Jamstack and fostering better partnerships and relationships. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this, right? Is digital maturity and organizational maturity. If you really espouse those things, you can create amazing front end experiences for your users first and foremost.
Yeah.
And you can have better tooling and workflows and happier marketers and happier developers, right?
Exactly. I can definitely say that when I saw your guys' tool at WebRick, that landing page generator, like that is a very cool direction in which like us developers can create for marketers and whatnot, and just give them just quick abilities to create content, but in a way that is essentially in unison with their design system overall. So it's very cool.
That's nice. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and have yourself a great rest of your day.
Definitely, you too.